The first two shots rang out, no one noticed. A sharp staccato blended in with the beat of the music. It took a few moments to sink in. For some, it was the flash of the gun. For others, it was the piercing booms, one after another. People dove to the floor, trying to elbow crawl for room. Others lunged for the doors, separating from friends, stepping over bodies to run for their lives. By 2:09 a.m., it was clear that the Pulse nightclub was under attack from an armed terrorist, killing wantonly and indiscriminately. For 3 harrowing hours, the gunmen held people hostage. One woman said that she survived by hiding in the bathroom and covering herself with bodies. Others took cover in coat rooms and air conditioning vents. 49 people died that night. As first responders entered the scene, the cell phones of the victims rang incessantly, a cacophonous soundtrack to the carnage. June's Orlando attack was both a heartbreaking tragedy and a shocking reminder of the vulnerability that many in the LGBT community feel. I mourned for the victims as I read about who these people were. The loving son who would give you the shirt off his back. The guy in the top hat who was shot while shielding his boyfriend from a hail of bullets. The mother of 11 who died protecting the son that she was dancing with. The implications of the attack also weighed heavily on me. Another time and another city. It could have been my community. It could have been my friends. It could have been me. Orlando was one of many jarring reminders that our world can be a lot more scary and full of uncertainty than we care to think about. We read about it in the news all the time. The death of the children at Sandy Hook Elementary School, the attack on Jews at a kosher grocery store, and the rampant sexual assault of young women and men at college campuses have all taught us that sometimes our safe spaces cannot protect us. These tragedies also remind us of how easy it can be to live our lives with a mentality of fear. And yet the emotion of fear is also incredibly messy. The impulse we have to be on high alert and keep ourselves out of harm's way is the same impulse that leads to racial profiling. It is the same impulse that has led authorities to remove Arabic-speaking individuals from airplanes on the unwarranted suspicions of fellow passengers and flight crew members. It is the same impulse that has led officers to shoot and kill unarmed black men. The same emotion that can save our lives also has the potential to do unspeakable harm. And when we look at fear at a biochemical level, we see precisely why it is so messy. The locus of fear in the brain is a little area called the amygdala. The amygdala fires up when something excites us and causes the secretion of adrenaline to make us go into flight or fight mode. It is connected to the ancestral reptilian parts of our brains. So when we get scared, the amygdala short-circuits the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brains that contains the rationality and judgment we use to predict the consequences of our actions. Scientific studies have shown that our amygdala automatically fires up when we see someone of a different race. In other words, fear has the potential to cause us to be less rational, more impulsive, more judgmental, and ultimately, more racist. Fear can connect us to our worst instincts. Now, given how complicated fear can be, how do we navigate it instead of reacting to it? How do we distinguish rational fear from irrational paranoia? And in an uncertain world, how do we live with the presence of fear without succumbing to it? Our tradition doesn't have any easy answers to such challenging questions. But one bit of text in the Talmud provides a useful framework for how we might classify different kinds of fears. In Masechet Shabbat, we learn about 5 different kinds of fears that the weak arouse in the strong. And I believe that 3 of these categories provide useful metaphors for classifying the ways that we experience fear. One of the categories that the text mentions is the fear that the mosquito arouses in the elephant. Now, clearly, this text was written before Zika virus. So I think it's safe to assume that the Talmud assumes that the mosquito is of no consequence to the elephant because of the magnitudes and difference of size and stature between them. And yet the mosquito drives the elephant crazy. What absurdity! So what kind of fear is this? This is the kind of fear that we witness when something that is very small drives an entire society to distraction. I see this fear in recent state legislative attempts to prohibit transgender people from choosing bathrooms based on their gender identity. A commonly cited justification is that depraved individuals could perpetuate abuse against women and children. In reality, this is a solution in search of a problem. Instances of transgender people committing abuse in bathrooms are non-existent, and actually the people who experience the most violence and sexual assault are transgender people themselves. Thus, these laws are the elephant's reaction to the mosquito. They are prejudiced and hateful distractions to a threat that does not exist. They embody a tactic that politicians with nefarious intentions have commonly used in recent years to whip up fear in voters in order to manipulate them. This elephant fear is a nasty and irrational tendency that we have to do our best to eliminate in ourselves. The second kind of fear that the Talmud mentions is more rational, but it is still one that we should be wary of. It is the scorpion's fear of the spider. Now, the scorpion is a fearsome insect with claws and teeth and stingers. In one-on-one combat, the scorpion will always win. But sometimes, when the scorpion lets its guard down, the spider is able to crawl in its ear, lodge in there, and kill it. When I think about this kind of fear, I think about Israel, a country for whom security is always an existential issue. We all know the reason why its army is so strong, its technology so advanced, its weapons state-of-the-art, are because it is a country that is called on to win its battles 100% of the time. The question that haunts us all is what happens those rare times when the spider sneaks through the seemingly ironclad defenses of the scorpion. We all know the devastating results: the stabbings of Israeli citizens, the suicide bombers who blow up buses and restaurants. In such an environment, it's only natural to feel threatened and unsafe, to feel as though one is constantly under attack. Now, this scorpion fear comes from a legitimate and rational place. However, the problem with it is its propensity to cause the innocent and harmless to look like spiders. When the strong see spiders everywhere and are forced into a defensive posture, they can often exert their strength in a way that comes with a moral cost. We see this in separation walls, limitations on Palestinian movement and development, and racial profiling by security forces. Now, I do not criticize Israel, because living with a scorpion mentality is a heavy burden, mentally, emotionally, societally. But I believe that when we are faced with a rational fear, we have to do our best to hold on to perspective. And this means that even when we feel threatened, we cannot think of ourselves as weak. This paradoxical mindset is difficult to hold and completely necessary if we are to act judiciously and prudently. The third kind of fear that the Talmud mentions is the eagle's fear of the sparrow. Now, the text imagines that the sparrow could lodge underneath the wings of the eagle when it's trying to take off and soar, preventing the eagle from gaining altitude and causing it to crash. What then does eagle fear represent? If we think about it from the eagle's perspective, we might say that it is the fear of going about one's daily life. If the eagle can't fly, then it can't go out and get food or build a nest or find a mate. Similarly, there are so many people out there who simply fail to launch and self-sabotage in their career and personal lives. Such emotional paralysis can lead to potential lost and precious life wasted. However, I think that there is another metaphor we might consider with eagle fear. For us, the eagle is a symbol of moral dignity. So when the eagle is afraid of flying, it's really a moral fear. It is the fear that when we try to stand up and do justly, to metaphorically allow our souls to soar, forces in favor of the status quo will come out and harm us. We see eagle fear in Queen Esther, who famously hesitated to act on behalf of her people facing genocide at the hands of Haman. It is only when she overcame her fear that she realized that the survival of her people was a cause that she was willing to die for. In the end, her risk pays off, and she successfully saves her people. Sometimes taking a moral stand does not end so well. 52 years ago, 3 extraordinary young men, Michael Schwerner, James Chaney, and Andrew Goodman, were murdered by the Ku Klux Klan for registering African Americans in Mississippi to vote. Embarking on such a mission in the Deep South in the 60s was a very risky endeavor, and these young men certainly knew that they were putting themselves in danger. Even so, they did not let fear deter them, because they knew that standing on the path of justice was of ultimate significance. We learn from eagle fear that fighting to make the world a better place involves risk. In responding to this fear, we have to consider what our values are, and ultimately what we are willing to fight for at the cost of our jobs, our livelihood, sometimes even our safety. So we see that the Talmud has given us useful metaphors for thinking about fear. However, the question still remains: when do we listen to the voice of fear in our heads? And when do we have to subdue it? Ultimately, this sort of discriminating is very hard, and we all make mistakes. Fear will always be a messy emotion, but I believe 2 lessons can help us navigate it. First lesson is that we have to understand that our fear is really a story that we're telling ourselves. When we understand fear this way, we can see that multiple narratives can exist about everything we encounter. Some of those narratives will be likely and rational, others far-fetched or preposterous. With this perspective, we can re-engage our logic and try to figure out which fears we have are elephant fears that we have to try to subdue, which are scorpion fears that we should listen to but with caution, and which are actually eagle fears that we have to go out and face. Now, sometimes we don't have time to engage in high-level interpretation because we have to act immediately and decisively for our safety. But when we can afford to slow down and interpret, we might realize that just because the voice of fear is the loudest in the room does not necessarily mean it is the one that should influence us. Lesson 2. Even though the world can be scary and uncertain, it is essential to be faithful. Now, I'm not saying that we have to go out and believe that everything will always work out, because I don't buy that either. However, faithfulness does not mean holding on to trite or blind belief. It means that we have to cultivate within ourselves trust, bitachon in the words of the Musar masters. Have faith that our loved ones will be there for us when we need them. Have faith in ourselves that when we encounter hardship, we will have the inner strength to transcend difficulty and overcome despair. And have faith in God. Have faith that in the midst of all the ugliness thrown our way, that there is always beauty to be found in the world. As the psalmist said, "Though I walk through the valley of deepest darkness, I fear no evil, for you are with me." There was a lot of ugliness and horror in Orlando this summer, but a number of other stories emerged as well. We heard about Joshua McGill, a nursing student who, fleeing from the nightclub, risked his life to tend to a stranger with multiple gun wounds. Josh pulled the man to safety, tied up his wounds with a shirt, and kept him conscious. He said to him, "Stick with me. You're going to be fine. I promise you. Everything will be okay. I'm not leaving you." Even when he was scared, even when he didn't know if everything would be okay or if they would escape the carnage, Josh embodied calm, bravery, and selflessness. Josh proved that night that fear does not have to bring out our ugliness. Sometimes it enables us to soar. Indeed, in the face of terror and fear, I am always struck by the small acts of courage, kindness, and love. And I'm always reminded of the profound decency and care that unites us deep down. Because ultimately, we learn from Orlando the same lesson we learned from 9/11 and every other tragedy, that we must never succumb to terror, never let fear bring out the worst in ourselves. And most importantly, remember that hate will always be defeated by the magnificence of love.